There is something deeply revealing about the way a person behaves when nobody is watching. When the noise disappears, when the phone is silent, when there is no audience to impress and no one available to give you immediate validation, what remains is your mind. And for some people, that silence is uncomfortable. They immediately reach for distraction. They need conversation, entertainment, notifications, approval. They cannot tolerate being alone with their own thoughts for very long. But there is another kind of person. This person can sit alone for hours and not feel abandoned. They can read, think, write, observe, plan, or simply allow their mind to wander without needing someone else to constantly stimulate them. What looks like isolation from the outside may actually be an intense form of mental independence, and this is where intelligence begins to become powerful. We often misunderstand intelligence because we associate it with visible achievements. We imagine intelligence as someone speaking brilliantly, winning arguments, having impressive qualifications, or demonstrating knowledge in public. But some of the most important forms of intelligence are invisible. They happen internally. They occur when you question something everyone else accepts. They occur when you recognize a pattern before anyone else sees it. They occur when you are willing to sit with a difficult idea instead of immediately escaping into comfort. Solitude creates the psychological environment where these things become possible. When you are constantly surrounded by people, you are exposed to their expectations, their fears, their ambitions, and their assumptions. Without realizing it, you begin to absorb the emotional atmosphere around you. You may start wanting what they want simply because everyone around you wants it. You may begin judging yourself according to standards you never consciously chose. This is one of the hidden dangers of excessive social dependence. You stop asking, "What do I actually think?" Instead, you ask, "What will people think of me?" Those two questions lead to completely different lives. The first produces independence. The second produces conformity. A person who can comfortably spend time alone begins to separate their own voice from the voices they have inherited. They start examining their beliefs. Why do I want this? Why does this person matter so much to me? Why am I afraid of being rejected? Why do I feel compelled to prove myself? Why am I pursuing this goal? Is it genuinely mine? Or did I simply learn to desire it because society rewarded people who possessed it? These questions are uncomfortable, but intellectual growth almost always begins with discomfort. This is why solitude can become a form of psychological training. When you are alone, there is nobody to immediately interrupt your thoughts. You begin noticing things about yourself that are easy to hide in a crowd. You notice your insecurities, your impulses, your need for approval, your unresolved frustrations. You begin seeing how often you react instead of think. And this self-observation is crucial because you cannot master what you refuse to observe. Imagine someone who spends every waking moment surrounded by noise. The moment they feel bored, they consume something. The moment they feel anxious, they seek reassurance. The moment they feel uncertain, they ask someone what they should do. Gradually, they lose the ability to generate their own internal direction. Now imagine someone who does the opposite. They experience uncertainty and sit with it. They experience boredom and allow it. They encounter a difficult problem and wrestle with it before searching for an easy answer. They make a mistake and analyze it instead of immediately blaming someone else. That person is developing something far more valuable than information. They are developing mental autonomy. And mental autonomy is one of the foundations of power. This does not mean becoming antisocial or believing that other people are beneath you. That is not intelligence. It is often insecurity disguised as superiority. Truly intelligent people understand the value of relationships, collaboration, conversation, and opposing perspectives. The difference is that they do not require constant social presence to feel whole. They can enter the crowd without becoming the crowd. That distinction matters. You should be able to listen to 10 people and still think for yourself. You should be able to receive criticism without automatically accepting it. You should be able to hear an opinion without feeling threatened by it. You should be able to walk away from a group without experiencing a crisis of identity. That is independence. And once you develop it, something changes in the way you move through the world. You become less desperate to be understood. You become less eager to explain yourself. You stop performing every thought for an audience. You begin to realize that not every idea needs to be announced, not every achievement needs to be displayed, and not every moment of your life needs witnesses. There is tremendous psychological freedom in this, because when you no longer need an audience, you can finally concentrate on the work. Think about how much energy people waste trying to appear intelligent rather than becoming intelligent. They want to sound sophisticated, but they do not want to study. They want recognition, but they do not want the years of private practice that recognition requires. They want people to admire their potential while avoiding the discipline necessary to realize it. Solitude exposes this difference. When nobody is watching, are you still learning? When nobody praises you, are you still improving? When nobody knows what you are working on, do you continue? Those questions reveal character. The person who can answer yes has discovered something most people spend their lives chasing: internal motivation. And once you possess that, you become difficult to manipulate. Why? Because manipulation often depends upon controlling your need for approval, belonging, recognition, or acceptance. If someone can make you desperate for their attention, they can influence your behavior. If they can make you afraid of exclusion, they can make you compromise your principles. If they can make you dependent upon praise, they can control your emotional state by giving or withholding it. But a person who is comfortable alone has a psychological advantage. They can walk away. They can say no. They can disappoint people without collapsing internally. They can choose long-term growth over short-term acceptance. That is why solitude, when used correctly, is not emptiness. It is preparation. It is where you sharpen your judgment before entering the world again. It is where you examine your motives before making decisions. It is where you develop ideas that have not yet been contaminated by the need for approval. But remember, solitude itself does not make you intelligent. You can be alone and still waste your mind. The real power comes from what you do with that solitude. Read something difficult. Write down what you actually believe. Study human behavior, question your assumptions, review your failures, plan your future. Sit quietly long enough to discover which thoughts are truly yours. Then return to the world, observe more carefully, speak more deliberately, listen without immediately reacting. Notice what people reveal unintentionally, and most importantly, do not surrender your judgment simply because everyone around you agrees. The goal is not to escape humanity. The goal is to understand yourself well enough that humanity cannot easily program you. So the next time you find yourself alone, do not automatically interpret the silence as loneliness. Ask yourself what the silence is trying to reveal, because the person who fears being alone will constantly search for noise. But the person who learns to think alone begins to create a mind that no crowd can control. And once you become comfortable with your own mind, something else begins to happen. You stop feeling the desperate need to fill every silence with your own voice. You begin to observe. This may sound simple, but observation is one of the most underestimated forms of intelligence. Most people do not truly observe other people. They react to them, they hear words, and immediately prepare their response. They see behavior and instantly attach a judgment. Someone is rude and they become angry. Someone compliments them and they become pleased. Someone ignores them and they become insecure. They are constantly reacting, but rarely studying. The intelligent person develops a different habit. They pause, they watch, they listen, and in that small space between what happens and how they respond, they gain something extremely valuable: information. Think about how much people reveal without realizing it. A person's words tell you one thing, but their timing, tone, facial expressions, habits, contradictions, and reactions often tell you something else. Someone may tell you they are confident while constantly seeking approval. Someone may claim they do not care what others think while becoming visibly uncomfortable when criticized. Someone may describe themselves as generous while repeatedly reminding everyone of their generosity. The observant person notices these inconsistencies, but this is not about becoming suspicious of everyone. It is about becoming psychologically literate. Human beings are complicated. We are rarely as transparent as we believe we are. Sometimes people do not even understand their own motives. They may believe they are acting from principle when they are actually acting from fear. They may believe they are helping when they are seeking control. They may believe they are protecting themselves when they are simply avoiding vulnerability. If you want to understand people, you must learn to look beyond their explanations. Watch patterns. One isolated behavior can be misleading. A pattern is different. Someone may cancel plans once because something genuinely happened. But if they repeatedly cancel whenever they are expected to take responsibility, you are no longer looking at an accident. You are looking at a pattern. Someone may become defensive during one difficult conversation that does not necessarily tell you much. But if they become defensive whenever their behavior is questioned, you have discovered something about how they protect their ego. Patterns reveal what isolated moments conceal, and this is where intelligence becomes strategically useful. The intelligent observer does not rush to label people. They collect evidence. They do not say, "I know exactly what this person is." They think, "Let me watch what they consistently do." That distinction is enormous, because one of the easiest ways to be manipulated is to believe your first impression is always correct. Human beings love certainty. We see a person for 5 minutes and construct an entire story about them. We decide who is trustworthy, who is dangerous, who is successful, who is weak, who is intelligent. But first impressions are often projections. We see what we expect to see. The disciplined observer fights this tendency. They allow reality to accumulate before forming conclusions. This is why silence can be so powerful. When you speak constantly, you reveal your assumptions, your emotions, your priorities, and your insecurities. When you listen, you create space for other people to reveal themselves. And people often reveal more when they believe they are simply having a conversation. They tell you what they value. They tell you what they fear. They tell you what they resent. They tell you who they admire. They tell you what kind of recognition they crave. Sometimes they even tell you exactly how they behave under pressure. You do not need to interrogate them. You only need to pay attention. Consider the difference between someone who enters a room trying to impress everyone and someone who enters a room quietly studying the environment. The first person is spending energy managing an image. The second is gathering information. Who has the greater psychological advantage? Usually the observer, because attention is a resource. If you are constantly trying to be noticed, you have less attention available for noticing others. If you are obsessed with proving your intelligence, you become less capable of learning. If you are constantly defending your position, you stop hearing information that could challenge it. The ego wants to demonstrate, intelligence wants to understand. That is why one of the most powerful habits you can develop is learning to listen without immediately trying to control the conversation. Ask yourself, what is this person really trying to communicate? What are they avoiding? What changes when they discuss certain subjects? What happens when they do not get what they want? How do they treat people who cannot benefit them? How do they behave when nobody important is watching? These questions take you deeper than appearances. And notice something important. The goal is not to manipulate people with this knowledge. The goal is to stop being naive about human behavior. There is a difference. Psychological awareness should make you more disciplined, not more cynical. You do not need to assume everyone has bad intentions. You simply need to stop assuming everyone has good intentions either. Give people room to demonstrate who they are. Trust should be based on patterns, not promises. Respect should be based on behavior, not status. Character should be judged by consistency, not performance. This mindset protects you from one of the greatest weaknesses a person can have: emotional impulsiveness. When you react immediately, other people can steer you. They insult you and you explode. They flatter you and you become attached. They withdraw attention and you chase them. They challenge your status and you feel compelled to prove yourself. In every case, they have discovered the button that controls you. But when you become observant, you start seeing the mechanism. You notice the provocation before reacting to it. You notice the compliment before becoming dependent on it. You notice the pressure before surrendering to it. You create distance between stimulus and response. And that distance is where self-control lies. This is one reason intelligent people can sometimes appear mysterious. They do not react to everything they notice. They understand that information becomes more valuable when you do not immediately reveal what you know. You do not have to announce every observation. You do not have to tell someone, "I noticed that you became uncomfortable when I mentioned this." You can simply remember it, not as ammunition, but as understanding. Over time, your picture of people becomes more accurate. You begin to recognize who becomes generous when they have power, who becomes cruel when they have power, who becomes insecure when challenged, who becomes calm under pressure, and who changes personality depending on the audience. You begin to see that behavior is often more honest than language. And once you understand this, you stop being so easily impressed by appearances. Titles no longer automatically impress you. Confidence no longer automatically convinces you. Charm no longer automatically earns your trust. You begin asking the deeper question: what does this person consistently demonstrate? That question can save you years of confusion. So develop the discipline of observation. Speak, but do not speak simply to fill silence. Listen, but do not listen passively. Watch how people behave when they are disappointed, ignored, challenged, rewarded, or given authority. And most importantly, watch yourself, because the same psychological patterns you study in others exist within you. Your own reactions are data. Your jealousy tells you something. Your anger tells you something. Your need for approval tells you something. Your discomfort with silence tells you something. Intelligence is not merely the ability to understand the world outside you. It is the courage to study the world within you with the same honesty. When you learn to observe without immediately reacting, you become harder to deceive, harder to provoke, and harder to control. And once you have learned to think independently and observe the world without constantly reacting to it, you arrive at the third and perhaps most important quality: the ability to educate yourself without needing someone to push you. This is where intelligence stops being a personality trait and becomes a discipline. There is a difference between being intelligent and becoming more intelligent. One may be natural ability, the other is a decision you make repeatedly. Most people wait for external pressure before they improve. They need a teacher to tell them what to study, a manager to tell them what to fix, a deadline to make them work, a competitor to make them ambitious, praise to make them continue. But there is another kind of person. They become their own teacher. When they encounter something they do not understand, they become curious rather than embarrassed. They investigate, they read, they experiment, they ask better questions. They return to the problem again and again until the pieces begin to connect. This ability is incredibly powerful because the world is changing too quickly for anyone to remain dependent on a fixed education. The person who can teach themselves can adapt, and adaptability is one of the clearest signs of a powerful mind. Think about what happens when you stop asking, "Who will teach me?" and start asking, "How can I figure this out?" That single change transforms your relationship with difficulty. A difficult subject is no longer proof that you are incapable. It becomes an invitation to investigate. A mistake is no longer simply an embarrassment. It becomes information, failure becomes feedback, confusion becomes the beginning of understanding. This is how intellectual independence develops, but self-education requires something most people resist: the willingness to be a beginner. Your ego wants to appear competent immediately. It wants to understand quickly. It wants other people to believe you already know what you are doing. The intelligent person accepts temporary incompetence. They can say, "I don't understand this yet." Those last two words matter. Not yet. That mindset creates room for growth. You begin reading books that challenge your world view instead of only confirming it. You study subjects that initially seem difficult. You listen to people who disagree with you. You examine arguments that make you uncomfortable. Why? Because if you only consume ideas that flatter you, you are not educating yourself, you are reinforcing yourself. Real learning should sometimes disturb you. It should force you to reconsider assumptions you have carried for years. It should expose weaknesses in your reasoning. It should occasionally make you realize that something you were completely certain about was incomplete or wrong. That is not intellectual defeat. That is intellectual development. And there is another important element to this: private practice. Some of the most significant growth in your life will happen where nobody can see it. You will read when nobody knows you are reading. You will practice when nobody applauds. You will fail privately. You will repeat the same exercise dozens of times before anyone notices improvement. This is where many people quit. They want the identity without the process. They want to be considered disciplined without experiencing the boredom of discipline. They want to be considered intelligent without spending years confronting difficult ideas. But mastery is built in private. The world usually sees the result. It rarely sees the repetition that created it. This is why you should become comfortable working without immediate recognition. If you can only work when people praise you, your motivation is fragile. If you can continue when nobody notices, your motivation has become internal. And internal motivation is extraordinarily difficult to destroy. People can ignore you. They can criticize you. They can underestimate you. They can refuse to recognize your progress. None of that has to stop you, because your standard is no longer determined by their reaction. You know what you are building. You know what you are learning. You know how far you have come. That creates a different psychological relationship with success. You stop asking, "Does everyone see my progress?" You start asking, "Am I actually becoming better?" That question is much harder and much more useful. It forces honesty. Maybe you are not improving as quickly as you imagined. Maybe your habits are not as disciplined as you tell yourself. Maybe you are spending too much time consuming information and not enough time applying it. Maybe you are confusing being busy with becoming capable. Self-education requires you to confront these realities. You become both student and examiner. You must evaluate yourself without flattering yourself. That does not mean becoming cruel toward yourself. It means becoming accurate. Accuracy is the foundation of improvement. If you misdiagnose the problem, you cannot solve it. If you tell yourself you are failing because other people are jealous, when the real problem is that you have not practiced enough, you learn nothing. If you blame circumstances for every setback, you surrender the opportunity to develop. The intelligent person asks a more difficult question: what can this experience teach me? That question gives you power because it converts experience into knowledge. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every rejection becomes information. Every failure becomes an experiment. Every difficult person becomes an opportunity to understand human behavior. Every period of solitude becomes an opportunity to develop yourself. Suddenly, life itself becomes a classroom. And you no longer need perfect circumstances to grow. You can learn anywhere. You can learn from books, conversations, failures, history, relationships, observation, work, and even your own emotional reactions. The world becomes filled with teachers because your mind has become willing to learn. But there is one final danger. Knowledge without action can become another form of procrastination. You can watch thousands of videos about discipline and remain undisciplined. You can read hundreds of books about psychology and still be controlled by your emotions. You can understand strategy intellectually and still make impulsive decisions. At some point, information must become behavior. This is where intelligence proves itself. You read something useful and apply it. You discover a weakness and work on it. You recognize a destructive habit and replace it. You learn a skill and practice until you can perform it under pressure. The purpose of learning is not to create the illusion that you are becoming wiser. The purpose is to actually become wiser. And this brings us back to the larger idea behind everything we have discussed. The person who can spend time alone develops independence. The person who observes carefully develops awareness. And the person who teaches themselves develops adaptability. Put those three qualities together, and you create a person who is extremely difficult to manipulate. They do not need constant approval. They do not react blindly. They do not wait for permission to grow. They think for themselves. They watch carefully. They learn continuously. That is what makes intelligence powerful. Not the ability to impress people with what you know, but the ability to keep becoming someone you did not yet know how to be. So stop waiting for someone to rescue your potential. Pick up the book, study the subject, practice the skill. Question your assumptions, review your mistakes, build quietly, and let your results speak only when they are ready.